Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Union San Pedro Wash Process Mexico from Square Mile Coffee Roasters. And there's the cup right there. And this is the sixth and final part of our Vancouver review series. I'm currently at the Revolver on Cambie Street, which is their only location. Let me go ahead and discuss this coffee shop a little further for anybody that's not familiar with it. In yesterday's Nemesis video, I mentioned a second multi-roaster in Gastown I used to visit every time I was in Vancouver, and that is this shop right here, as they're less than a minute's walk apart from each other. So back in the day, I used to scope out both coffee shops to see what roasters they were offering, and that gave me an opportunity to try places like Square Mile, which we will be reviewing here today. And let's discuss how the cafe works. So they do have 6 pour-over offerings, 3 of which on the fruity side of things and 3 of which on the more chocolate tame side of things. And they also have a drip option, which was a coffee from Tom Bargain. But I opted for this coffee right here because Square Mile is on our suggestions recommendations list and we haven't reviewed them yet. They are a coffee roaster I do have extensive familiarity with, and they are a quite well-known coffee roaster as they are owned by James Hoffman. They are London-based, of course, and we should discuss the roast profile before discussing this coffee real quick. So when it comes to a lot of Square Mile's coffees, they do feel like they are on the slightly more developed side of things. This one was slightly lighter than I think I was expecting going into it, so I would assume that maybe this is on the lighter side of their spectrum. Even then, this still would be a lot more in terms of that sort of light medium, but definitely on the more developed side of that light medium. I think a lot of people would actually say this is on the lighter side of a medium in terms of that development, because this does have a fair bit of development, probably the most developed coffee we've reviewed during the entirety of this review series, so keep that in mind. But with that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. Now, first impression, and I was going into it fully expecting a very sort of standard Central American coffee, and that's what I got. However, I had a lot of praise to give this coffee because it did have some really nice balance to it. As the sweetness was on the forefront, I wasn't expecting this coffee to be maybe as sweet as it turned out, but I also mentioned that it was slightly lighter than I think I was expecting going into it. Now, the first things I noticed were naturally going to be a lot more of the chocolatey side of things, but in addition to that, it did have a little bit of that caramelized aspect, which wasn't necessarily what I was expecting, but given the level of sweetness that was present within it, I thought that that was a very nice touch to kind of complement and round out this coffee. It did come out quite balanced, and there was a slight bit of the apple acidity, so it's been in line with a lot of the coffees that we've reviewed up to this point during this review series. I've done my best to kind of step out of my comfort zone and review coffees that may not necessarily be my profile, but are definitely coffees that I might be, well, they might make for interesting reviews. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. And notes, so let's go ahead and start discussing it. So we have a couple of level 4s, and we will start with the chocolate level 4. Yeah, no part of that's really surprising. I think given the origin as well as the roast profile of this coffee, that's one of the things that you would fully expect. However, it is on the sweeter side of the chocolate, so that's a nice little touch. They do have cacao listed as a note, and if anything, I would actually say that it's a little closer to a milk chocolate for me on this one, mostly due to the fact that it does have some nice sweetness to it. Caramel, level 4. That's the best part of this coffee, and that was at the forefront, and as it's cooled down, it's actually gained a little bit more prominence and notoriety within the cup itself. Kind of interesting, not necessarily a note that they listed, but it was quite pronounced in this coffee for me, so that's my favorite part of this coffee. Body, level 4. That's kind of interesting because it is on the lower side of the level 4, and I was waffling back and forth where I wanted to put it because it could justify the higher side of the level 3, but I'll say that's definitely on the lower side of the level 4. Not the most textured cup of coffee I've had. All of the coffees that they brew here are with the V60, so maybe that played a role in this coffee, but level 4 still, nonetheless. Cleanliness, level 4. Yes, that is probably the place where I must give this coffee the most praise because this coffee has great clarity to it. So I said that it has good structure as well. It's very well balanced. These are a lot of the positives I took away from this coffee specifically, and the cleanliness was a really nice part of that. Because this coffee was as clean as it was, it definitely helped the overall experience within this coffee. Finish, level 4, yeah, has a really nice kind of sweet caramel finish to it, and that's another nice positive to this coffee. I think this coffee did exceed my expectations, if I'm being completely honest, because when I was in London, I had so many Square Mile coffees the entire time, and it wasn't necessarily my favorite. So I was kind of going into this expecting maybe a little bit more development, maybe a little less sweetness, and maybe a little less kind of well-rounded and defined of a coffee. But I was pleasantly surprised, and it could be credit to Revolver, it could be credit to Square Mile. I'm just going to give credit to both because all of these things turned out quite nice. Bunch of level 3s, sweetness level 3. I would actually say the higher side of level 3. This had a little bit more sweetness than I was expecting too, so that's a nice touch. They do have sweet listed as one of their notes on there, but yeah, it turned out to be true. Acidity level 3. I don't know when this coffee was actually roasted, but I feel like this coffee initially had a little bit more acidity, a little bit more brightness to it than when I'm experiencing it today. Nonetheless, the brightness was a little bit more moderate, which is fine by me. Acidity is not necessarily an overly important thing for me in coffee. Spice, salts, level 3, I think those are both kind of toned down. This coffee has really gained a lot of structure and clarity as it has cooled down, so probably would lower those. This coffee does change quite a bit throughout the time drinking it. Garbage truck passing by. Citrus, level 3, and that's again kind of attributed to that apple component in there, that apple acidity, and I would say, yeah, it's slight, it's present in the coffee, but not too pronounced, so that's why it finishes there at that 3. Smoke, level 3, another thing that kind of goes down as this coffee does cool down. I bumped that down to a level 2. A lot of these extras at this level 3 I would bump down to a level 2 as the coffee does cool. But yeah, that's pretty much my experience from this coffee in terms of the tasting wheel. I think it's a nice representation of what I was getting from this coffee. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. This one exceeded my expectations. It's actually a very kind of safe middle ground coffee because while it does have a little bit more development than I typically drink with coffees, I think it was just so well structured in general that it made me really enjoy it more than a lot of the other coffees I've enjoyed to this point. As I mentioned, I've been kind of branching out and trying some things that I normally wouldn't try, but this one right here left such a positive experience that it just exceeded my expectations. And once again, I'll give credit to both Square Mile as well as Revolver for producing a very good cup of coffee that definitely exceeded my expectations. Type of person I would suggest this coffee to, though, I definitely want to say, obviously, a little bit more development in mind, but not as much as you might expect from something that is, well, based out of England. This one definitely felt slightly lighter in terms of that as well, but it was well balanced. So think of your very well balanced cups of coffee. It doesn't skew heavy in any of the fruit directions. As you can see, those were all kind of lower. The florality was also kind of lower, but this is very much that crowd pleaser sort of coffee. It does have great sweetness in terms of the directions. That's a little bit more traditional for coffee. That, of course, being the chocolate and the caramel side of things. And at the same time, it's not overbearing in terms of sweetness, but does give you a nice bit of it as well, while maintaining a somewhat moderate acidity overall. I think I'll leave this review at that. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee shop, or anything from Square Mile, I'd love to know your thoughts and impressions of any of them, or that as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the Union San Pedro Wash Process Mexico from Square Mile Coffee Roasters. Thank you for watching.